It started like a strange corporate script: warnings, performance evaluations, tone checks, and veiled ultimatums disguised as casual comments. Over time, I began to notice a pattern, subtle at first, but unmistakable once I truly paid attention. Every few weeks, she'd fire off another reprimand over something minor, something normal. If you forget to clean up again, you'll be flying. One more late night at work, and you're sleeping on the couch. Keep it up, and I'll start tracking your emotional unavailability like a project timeline. At first, I took them as jokes. Dry humor, maybe. But she never smiled when she said them. That's what stuck with me. I started collecting them. Each sentence lodged in my brain like a line from a human resources memo. They weren't spontaneous expressions of frustration. They were scripted declarations of leverage. She treated me like an intern on probation, not a partner who had shared her bed and life for 7 years. Over time, I began referring to her in my mind as my wife, the regional manager. It wasn't always like that. I remember when she used to lean on my shoulder during long movies, or whisper that I made her feel safe just by being in the room. Those memories feel like photographs someone else took, too faded to believe they were mine. At some point, affection gave way to efficiency. Love turned into obligation. The woman who used to laugh at my bad impressions now sighed at my choice of socks. The woman who once pulled me into the kitchen for a spontaneous dance now measured out responses like a negotiator trying not to concede too much. At first, I tried harder. I bought flowers more often, came home earlier, did the dishes without prompting, and picked up her prescriptions without being asked. She acknowledged none of it. If anything, it made her colder, like I was confirming her theory that I needed managing. It became a game of thresholds. How close could she push me toward correction without triggering confrontation? There was one day I came home late. Traffic, nothing more. When I walked in, she was sitting on the couch with a glass of wine, eyes glued to her phone. I apologized automatically, out of habit more than guilt. She didn't look up, just said, "Late again. Strike two." That phrase echoed in my mind longer than I cared to admit because it told me everything about how she saw me. The thing is, I wasn't failing her. I never checked out of the marriage, never lied, never stopped contributing. I was trying to keep us afloat while she seemed intent on running me through quarterly reviews. Every disagreement became an infraction. Every differing opinion is a sign of disrespect. I wasn't her partner anymore. I was her liability. I started talking less, not out of resentment, but self-preservation. When you live in a place where every sentence might become evidence, silence becomes your shield. I found myself holding back opinions, shelving stories from my day, censoring jokes before they left my mouth. Because I couldn't stand the look, the mixture of disappointment and calculation she wore like a second skin. And yet, I didn't leave. Part of me believed this was just a rough season, that the woman I loved might still be buried under all that strategy and severity. That if I stayed long enough, did enough, said the right words, I'd find her again. I tried to excavate her with acts of service, small surprises, weekend plans, and shoulder rubs without strings attached. But every gesture fell into a void. I began noticing her vocabulary shift. She used phrases like emotional accountability and personal boundaries, with an edge that felt less about health and more about leverage. Whenever I asked for time together or mentioned how disconnected I felt, she responded with things like, "I shouldn't have to remind you how to be present," or "It's not my job to fix what you ignore." Every request became a negotiation. Every need had to be justified like a purchase order. The final proof came one night when she left a Post-it on the fridge. I just walked in from a 12-hour day, dropped my keys in the dish, and there it was, dishwasher full. Forgot again. Note filed. It was the first time she'd turned the joke entirely literal. She had stopped talking altogether, just left a written note, like we were office coworkers sharing a break room. I peeled it off, stared at it, and then placed it in my wallet, not as a keepsake, but as documentation. That night, I didn't sleep much. I stared at the ceiling, wondering when we stopped speaking to each other. I wasn't angry, just tired in a way that seeps into your bones. I started asking myself questions I hadn't dared to ask before. What am I preserving here? Who am I fighting for? And is this even a marriage anymore? Or just an extended HR complaint waiting to be filed? The next morning, I called a lawyer. I didn't schedule anything, just asked for a consultation. I told myself it was a precaution, a contingency. But deep down, I knew better. I wasn't planning my exit yet, but I was scanning for emergency exits on the plane, just in case. I hung up without telling anyone, slipped the card into my desk drawer, and kept playing the game, waiting for the following warning. Because if there's one thing I've learned in this role, it's that the moment someone treats you like an employee, the clock's already ticking on your resignation. Saturday morning felt deceptively ordinary. The kind of quiet where the kitchen clock ticking actually sounded loud, where the only aroma was fresh coffee drifting from the machine she insisted on programming to start at precisely 8 o'clock. I had already prepped breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast slightly burnt the way she oddly preferred it, and the raspberry jam she only liked if it was French. Routine. Predictable. Harmless. She walked in with a familiar sigh, one she usually reserved for messages from her boss or late Amazon deliveries. Her robe swayed as she moved to the cabinet, taking out her favorite plate, the one with the hand-painted rim from Santorini, and carefully plated her food as if we weren't about to stage a quiet marital ambush over scrambled eggs. I poured the coffee, placed her mug just where she liked it, handle facing left, a half-teaspoon of raw sugar already stirred in. She sat down, raised her eyebrows in that performative surprise she always used when something resembled effort, and then placed her plate on the table with theatrical precision. That's when it came. This is your final warning in our marriage. She didn't raise her voice. It wasn't sharp or angry. It came out clinical, almost rehearsed. It was like she was quoting from a script or delivering an HR disciplinary notice. Her eyes didn't flicker. Her mouth stayed neutral. But her index finger made a little downward flick, a silent, smug exclamation mark to punctuate the sentence. I took a slow sip of my coffee, savoring the bitterness. Then I looked her directly in the eye and replied, "Thanks for confirming this is the job I'm quitting." I could see the wheels turning. She thought I was joking and waiting for a chuckle, for the tension to dissolve into a playful eye roll. But I wasn't smiling. I wasn't performing. I was stating a fact. Her expression twitched, not quite confusion, more like a pause between commands on a system that suddenly returned an error message. She tried to reset. "You think this is funny?" "No," I said. "I think it's overdue." We finished the rest of breakfast in silence. She ate with small, deliberate motions, as if every bite was a new negotiation with herself. I cleared my plate, wiped the counter, and carried my mug outside onto the terrace. The sky was cloudless, unnaturally blue. The kind of morning that begged to be wasted on nothing but reflection. I pulled out my phone, found the number saved under a bland contact name, Howard R., and hit dial. He answered before the second ring. "Ready?" he asked, as if we were picking up a chess game from last week. "Let's activate option B," I said calmly. "Send the paperwork." Draft 1 looked clean. No edits. He didn't ask questions. That's why I chose him. I stared across the lawn while the call ended. The grass is overdue for mowing. Patio chair slightly off kilter. I would have fixed all things by noon. But not today. Today, I let them sit crooked, overgrown, unfinished. They didn't belong to me anymore. That thought didn't sting. It settled in like clarity. Like a meeting that finally ends. Back inside, she stood by the sink rinsing dishes that weren't dirty enough to warrant the performance. I passed behind her without a word and walked into the office. Pulled out a small folder from the bottom drawer. It held the backup bank forms I'd pre-filled weeks ago, just in case. The joint account was still active, but the salary reroute would be finalized by Monday. There was enough left in the old account to cover the rent through the end of the month, plus a buffer for utilities. No confrontations. Just numbers and dates lining up like dominoes, ready to fall. She walked past the door, glancing in as if to gauge whether this was still her house or a space under audit. I didn't give her the dignity of a power struggle. My silence was a final report. That afternoon, I opened the admin dashboard on our streaming services. I removed her email from the Netflix family plan, logged out all devices, sent a short message. From now on, services are paid for by the account owner. Then came the practicalities. 3 plastic storage containers ordered from a same-day delivery service. In them, I packed my essentials. Work tools, studio headphones, my guitars, objects that carried weight beyond their function. Clothes, chargers, documents, the hard drive with our photo archive copied to a separate partition, just in case she tried to claim digital sabotage. By evening, the house was quieter than it had been in months. She retreated to the bedroom, door half closed, eyes glued to her laptop. I could hear the aggressive click of keys, a sound she made when composing emails she wanted to sting without being flagged as hostile. I wondered who was on the receiving end this time. A friend? Her sister? A therapist? Didn't matter. It wasn't me. I opened my laptop and drafted the next step. Subject line: Notice of intent to separate. The body was simple. A list of bullet points: my move-out date, proposed mediator, an initial draft of a marital settlement agreement. I attached the file and saved it in drafts. Scheduled it for delivery tomorrow at noon, giving her time to digest, space to deny, and just enough rope to see if she'd pull or let go. This wasn't revenge. This was the slow burn of liberation. Tomorrow, the narrative would shift. Today, I simply marked the page. The following morning, I awoke before sunrise. It wasn't nerves. My mind felt still, methodical, like an engineer assembling a circuit one wire at a time. The ceiling above me was just drywall and paint, but it had started to resemble the final layer of a workspace I was already vacating. Her breathing remained steady beside me, unaware or pretending to be. Either way, the clock had started ticking on the life we shared under this roof. I slid out of bed and entered the office without turning on the lights. There was no ceremony to it, just the rhythm of steps I'd rehearsed in my head for weeks. I logged into my bank account, navigated to payroll preferences, and rerouted my direct deposit to the new institution. Clean interface, fast processing. The confirmation email landed within seconds. Next, I authorized one final transfer to the joint account, an amount sufficient to handle the rent, utilities, and incidentals for the remaining weeks of the month. With that settled, I pulled up our financial app. Her profile still had access to several of my subscriptions: Shopify, Audible, Spotify, Netflix. Digital threads tie me to shared comfort. I began severing them, one by one. A few button clicks and the auto payments vanished. Her devices would remain logged in for now, but the next billing cycle would bring the end of that connection. To make it official, I drafted a short email with the subject line, Access Realignment. It read, effective immediately, services previously covered under shared digital accounts will require direct ownership. Please update payment methods as appropriate. I reread it twice, ensuring there were no emotional cues. Then I hit send. Around mid-morning, the doorbell rang. 3 large plastic containers delivered on time. I tipped the driver, wheeled them into the hallway, and opened the first lid with a soft clack. I didn't need to take inventory. I already knew what mattered. My recording equipment went in first, carefully wrapped in foam. Then my guitars, each placed with reverence. My laptop, backup drives, and notebooks. A few books with creased spines, a box of letters I'd once written but never sent, and a framed photo of my late father that had always sat on my desk. Clothes were next. I didn't bother folding each item precisely. This wasn't a vacation or a sabbatical. It was a relocation. I chose only what I wore often: jeans, button-ups, workout gear, and 2 suits. The rest stayed in the closet like artifacts from a life I had finished archiving. As I packed, she hovered nearby once or twice, lingering in doorways without speaking. Her silence said plenty. She was observing but unsure whether to interrupt, object, or pretend she wasn't seeing it. I allowed the quiet to persist. This wasn't a negotiation. After lunch, I called the property manager. Polite as ever, he picked up and greeted me with his usual practice cheer. I requested a modification to the lease, termination of my share effective the 1st of next month, with a formal deposit division at move-out inspection. He hesitated briefly and asked whether this was mutual. I answered, "It will be clear enough by the date." He agreed and scheduled the inspection 2 weeks out. The calendar invite arrived within 5 minutes. With logistics moving into place, I reopened my laptop and attached the settlement draft Howard had sent. The mediation referral was already in the body of the email. I added a short paragraph above it all, confirming my intent to exit respectfully, without escalation. The tone was calm, the content legal. There was no trace of personal grievance, only structure. I scheduled the message to deploy at noon the following day. That timestamp mattered. It would land in her inbox when she least expected it, after her late morning coffee, but before her second task switch of the day. I wasn't aiming for an emotional effect. I wanted clarity. Timing mattered less than rhythm. With every step, the grip of shared history loosened. I walked through each room with fresh eyes, mentally separating what was essential from what was simply habit. That throw pillow on the sofa? Her choice. The artwork in the hallway? Gifted by her aunt. The framed poster from our honeymoon? Mine, though it now felt like a postcard from another man's trip. By early evening, I was down to small items: chargers, batteries, stationery mementos. I found the old chess set my brother gave me tucked behind a box of scented candles she never used. I placed it carefully on top of the container with the framed photo of Dad. It didn't weigh much, but it held substance, one of the few things that still grounded me. She passed by again around sunset. This time, she stopped. "What are you doing?" she asked, voice tight, eyebrows drawn together just enough to suggest disbelief rather than concern. I looked up from the open container. "Organizing," I said. "For what?" "I'm making things easier." "Easier for who?" I didn't answer, just closed the lid gently and clicked it shut. The latches snapped into place like a punctuation mark. She stared a moment longer, then walked off. No accusation, just footsteps disappearing into the other room. The door clicked behind her, a sound I'd soon be free from. That night, as I sat with a glass of whiskey and scrolled through housing options, I realized how natural the process felt. Like muscle memory from a life I hadn't lived yet, but somehow remembered. Each form completed, each account unlinked, each item packed. It was all part of a sequence. Not an exit, but a migration. A quiet transfer of self from a system that had long since stopped functioning. By the time the inspection came, the space would be clean, a place where nothing of mine remained to be claimed, contested, or mourned. I checked the time. One day left before she'd open that email. I closed the laptop and went to bed. The future was already underway. She opened the email at 12:07 p.m., just as I predicted. I had no way of tracking it. There was no red receipt, but I knew her patterns. That post-lunch lull, when she switched from work tabs to personal ones, checking messages between meetings, she claimed, was always too emotionally draining. The draft I'd queued was brief but exact. Subject: notice of intent to separate. Inside, the date I'd leave, a link to the mediator's calendar, the proposed settlement, and the number for Howard, my attorney. No warm regards. At 12:11, a single message hit my phone. Her name, all caps. "Are you kidding?" That was it. No follow-up. For minutes of silence. Then another. "I gave you a chance to improve." I watched the words appear, each one more fragile than the last, dressed up as confidence but unraveling by the second. I stared at the screen for a moment before responding. Chances are something bosses give subordinates. We were supposed to be partners. This isn't quitting. This is a departure. The read receipt confirmed she saw it immediately. Typing bubble. Then silence. 2 hours later, she attempted a significant withdrawal from our joint account. $3,000 marked as emergency. The transaction bounced. I'd lowered the ceiling earlier that morning per the financial plan Howard recommended. Nothing dramatic, just a modest daily cap that ensured equilibrium until the account expired at month's end. A push notification from the bank confirmed the denial, followed by a second. User attempted to exceed limit. At 3:30, the call came through, her voice tight, throat dry. "So this is really happening?" I said nothing. "You're really blowing everything up because of a stupid joke?" "That wasn't a joke," I said evenly. "You treated me like I needed supervision. Affection was conditional on meeting invisible standards. That's a strategy, not humor." "You're overreacting," she snapped. "You've said that about everything I've ever taken seriously." She hung up without reply. The official delivery came the next day. I timed it to her co-working session, an afternoon desk rental she used twice a week to separate personal energy from professional intention. Howard had the papers couriered, signed and sealed, presented by a process server with all the composure of a restaurant host calling out a reservation. "Divorce petition," he announced, placing the envelope beside her laptop. Heads turned. Conversation dimmed. Someone gasped. She called within minutes. Voicemail first. Then again. Then 3 rapid-fire texts. "How could you blindside me like this? You're humiliating both of us. Do you even care about our life?" I waited until the end of the workday before answering. Just one line. "I won't remain in a system where respect is negotiable." That evening, another message arrived. Long, rambling, layered with contradictions. She accused me of abandoning the foundation we built, of orchestrating a campaign to punish her for being assertive. The word assertive stood out. She didn't use cold, distant, or controlling. Just assertive, as if everything leading to this point was a strength misread as severity. I drafted my reply carefully. You weren't assertive. You were conditional. Love given in response to compliance isn't affection. It's management. I've already served my notice. From there, the pace quickened. Her friends reached out, subtly probing for context under the guise of concern. One messaged, "She's devastated." Another said, "I didn't know you two were having problems." I replied to neither. They weren't looking for the truth. They wanted a villain. In her version of events, I had walked away from something healthy because I couldn't handle accountability. Accountability. The irony made me laugh. I had spent years owning every misstep, internalizing every silence, paying emotional invoices I never submitted. She handed out reprimands while declaring herself immune to feedback. There was never a single conversation, only verdicts. The apartment grew quieter with each passing day. She moved less through shared spaces, speaking only when logistics required it. The kitchen became a neutral zone. The hallway turned transactional. Even her presence at home shifted. Longer outings, extended walks, mysterious phone calls taken outside with the kind of hushed tone reserved for war rooms and scandal. One evening, as I passed the living room, I overheard her through the door. Low voice, clipped cadence. "I don't know what his endgame is," she said. Pause. "He's acting like I'm some kind of monster." Another pause. "No, he hasn't yelled. That's the weird part." I stood still, absorbing the words like weather through a window. She was unraveling because I moved with the calm of someone who'd already left in his heart long before his body followed. That weekend, she tried one last maneuver. She offered to go to couples therapy, said she was willing to listen more actively, to reset expectations. She spoke like a project manager scheduling a pivot meeting. I declined. Therapy doesn't work when one person is already out the door. Her eyes narrowed. "So you're done?" "No," I said. "I finished a while ago. I just didn't clock out." Her silence in that moment told me she finally understood. I wasn't bluffing. I wasn't emotional. I was complete. In the days that followed, she attempted minor acts of control, deleting my remaining items from shared calendars, rearranging furniture to disrupt my routine, leaving passive comments out loud when she thought I was nearby. I met each one with the same approach I gave every other decision in this unraveling, clinical detachment. I had become something she didn't know how to fight. And soon, I'd be gone. The apartment inspection landed on a Monday. Overcast skies hung low, lending the air a kind of gray clarity, the type that makes endings feel cleaner than they are. The property manager arrived right on time, clipboard in hand, shoes covered with plastic. Out of respect for the hardwood floors he probably assessed a dozen times a week. I met him at the door, containers already lined up, keys dangling in my left hand. He moved from room to room with practiced efficiency, eyes glancing over surfaces, outlets, and hinges. The kind of man who didn't linger but noticed everything. As he walked through, I trailed behind, not explaining a single detail. Nothing needed defense. No furniture left scratched. Walls remained unblemished. The space reflected care, even as it emptied. She didn't emerge until we reached the hallway, arms folded, dressed like she had somewhere to be afterward. High-waisted jeans, blazer, face neutral. Her presence changed nothing. I handed over the key fob, pointed to the forwarding address for my portion of the deposit, and signed the exit form without pause. The manager smiled politely. "You've left things in excellent shape." I returned the smile. That's the least I could do. She watched, silent. No outburst. Just eyes calculating whether the moment called for emotion or strategy. It didn't. The equation had been solved. 15 minutes later, the inspection wrapped up. He thanked us both, stepped into the hallway, and disappeared down the stairs. She turned slightly, like she might say something, but I raised a hand. Not as a stop sign, more as a gesture of acknowledgement. An unspoken, "We're done here." Then I wheeled my containers outside, closed the building's front door behind me, and slid into the waiting cab. The driver confirmed the address, corporate apartment, downtown in another state, fully furnished. A relocation package had made it simple. Clean lines, fresh linens, utilities included. The job offer arrived 2 weeks prior. A promotion technically, though I hadn't applied for it. A colleague heard I was untethering, and the opportunity followed. Funny how quickly doors open once you stop trying to fix the hinges on the ones behind you. The ride was uneventful. City blocks blurred by like neutral memories. A soft drizzle began halfway there, casting everything in the kind of soft filter people use to hide imperfections in old photos. I leaned back, phone silent in my pocket. Messages would come, more disbelief, more bargaining, but they belonged to a different life, the one behind the closed door. When I arrived, the building receptionist handed me a welcome packet, smiled warmly, and pointed to the elevator. The unit was on the 8th floor. Clean walls, neutral tones, a faint smell of lavender from the diffuser on the entry shelf. The kind of place built for transitions, temporary but dignified. I unpacked only the essentials that night: laptop, chargers, and shaving kit. The rest stayed in the containers, stacked neatly in the corner like artifacts of a life already archived. No rush. The space didn't demand decoration. It offered function, simplicity, and peace. By the time the city lights flickered on outside, I'd settled into the small reading nook near the window, coffee in hand, laptop open, contract documents finalized and stored. No music played. Silence felt earned. Her final warning echoed faintly in my memory, less like a threat now, more like a line from a poorly written script. At the time, she thought it would corner me, spark urgency, and reignite submission. Instead, it clarified the dynamic. It gave me vocabulary for something I hadn't been able to articulate, that I had been serving time in a role that evaluated worth by performance rather than presence. She wanted accountability. I offered autonomy. She demanded course correction. I chose departure. My phone buzzed once, her name on the screen. I let it fade. That thread belonged to a fabric I no longer wore. I sipped the coffee. Pungent, slightly bitter. Just the way I preferred it. The taste reminded me of those early mornings back when we still laughed over toast, before the job titles crept into the language of affection, before I became something to manage. In the corner of the living room stood a new desk, untouched, its surface bare and inviting. I would write again, maybe, create something unfiltered, something unrelated to expectations. Outside, headlights glided through the street, rain soft against the window pane. The city moved on, as it always does. And in that quiet apartment, 8 floors above old responsibilities, I exhaled. Her final warning had become my reminder postcard. Never stay in a position where your value is measured in deliverables, especially when the only performance that matters is yours.
Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments, and do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel.